Hey, welcome to the Brief on Grief. So glad that you have joined us for another episode. I am your host, Walter Sanderson, and on the Brief on Grief, the question is always, what are you grieving? And possibly, who are you grieving? But on today, on the Brief on Grief, I want to have a slightly different discussion and conversation with somebody because I realized, and you need to realize, that we don't always grieve people that are deceased. There are times the person I'm grieving over right now, there was no funeral for that person. There was no memorial service for that person. And at times we find ourselves grieving people that are still living. Sometimes I'm grieving people that we've had a breakup. I'm grieving people that I've had to get divorced from. I'm grieving people that left me and walked out on me. And somebody knows that this can be devastating as somebody dying. Now, here I'm not comparing the sorrow, but what I am saying is that some people grieve of seeing somebody they love, that a relationship failed, seeing somebody constantly that you really haven't gotten over. Now, let me make the disclaimer. I am not claiming to be an expert on relationships. I'm not claiming to know everything about relationships. But what I do offer you on this episode on the Brief on Grief is countless hours of experience through counseling people in relationships, through counseling people in marriages, while also adding a personal and honest element as well. I know and have been in places where I feel like people have failed me in relationships, and I grieve that. And I also know that it's possible and likely that somebody grieved a relationship that they were in with me and I failed them. And although I'm going to share some of my counsel, some advice on this episode, I want you to know that there is always exceptions and no one approach can be tailored for everyone. Well, let me jump right into it. I was reading the word. Many of you know I am a pastor, and so I was reading the word, and there's a scripture, there's a text in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. And here it is that God is speaking to Samuel, and he asks him, how long are you going to mourn over Saul? Now, I'm not here to give you a Bible study. I'm here to just talk to somebody that is grieving and stuck in a relationship. God was really asking Samuel, asking the prophet, how long are you going to be in this place grieving over somebody that I have moved on from? Grieving over somebody that I am no longer with and my hand is no longer on. And I am saying to somebody, sometimes we all struggle and grieve when I'm in a place that I need to move on from. Sometimes we get in a place where we just aren't moving at all. And I've talked to people on several occasions, and sometimes they'll say, well, the reason I haven't left is because you know how many years I've been with this person? You know how much money and expenses have went into this relationship? You know how much sweat and tears I have given? You know how I am waiting to finally see this person grow into the potential I believe they have? And here is what they're really saying. I don't want to leave because I am waiting for a return on my investment. Let me say this to somebody today. You're in a place of grieving, wanting a return on your investment, but sometimes it's just a bad deal. I want you to put on your business mindset. Sometimes it's just a bad deal. You wouldn't stay in a business deal where you was constantly just losing money. You wouldn't go to a place to eat that wasn't satisfying to you when the food wasn't good. And many people in the business world, I need you to know, they focus not only on the return on their investment, but they focus on something called the cost of inaction. This is something you learn in the business world, But I believe if we take this approach in every area of our life, especially in relationships, that it would benefit us. Don't only focus on the return on investment, but focus on the cost of inaction. Quick story. It is said that the company Kodak, many of you know the film company, was the first to invent the digital camera back in the 1970s. And they filed a patent, so they would have the rights to it. And in the meantime, they did not fully develop the technology because they were worried about the cost it would take of the sales of the film that they had currently. Long story short, in 2007, the patent expired. And 5 years later, Kodak filed for bankruptcy. And what you learn here is while waiting for a return on their investment, while not wanting to incur any other cost, the cost of their inaction led to their bankruptcy. Now, I want somebody to look at your relationship that you may be stuck, you may be grieving in right now. Whether you realize it or not, we are all managers in our lives. There is business situations in your lives right now. You don't have to be in the corporate world. You are a manager of your own emotions. You are a manager of your own heart. And you are a manager of your own time. And far too often, when we're grieving in relationships and we get stuck, we allow other people to manage our heart, other people to manage and control our emotions, and other people to manage our time. And there are times we get so concerned with getting back a return on our investment that we don't require that things be done differently in the current relationship. We don't require more of the other person in the relationship, the cost of inaction. We don't take action at all. And when it's all said and done, we end up like Kodak, bankrupt in areas of our lives. Now, it's not always about money, it's not always expenses, and sometimes it is. And I counsel a lot of women and young ladies for the most part. And here where they find themselves bankrupt, you find yourselves bankrupt in a place of trust. After this relationship, you get stuck here. There is no trust in this relationship you're in now. And now you're bankrupt because you're not sure if you can trust anybody anymore. You're bankrupt in love. You go, well, I'm just stuck here. I'm not trying to give love like I've given here to anybody else. And more than any other thing in our lives, being a manager, we find ourselves bankrupt because of time wasted. So today on the Brief on Grief, it might be necessary for somebody in your relationship that you may be grieving right now, where things aren't getting better, when somebody isn't changing, when somebody won't do better. It might be necessary for you to stop waiting for a return on your investment and consider the cost of your inaction. And somebody else is trying to decide whether they should just stay in the relationship. You know what you really learn from the text that I shared with you earlier is that sometimes we're stuck and grieving in a place, and some of us are trying to do CPR on a relationship that is already dead. Some of us are trying to resuscitate a relationship that no longer has any value. And the question is, why do you have trouble moving on? And I know somebody's going to look at this video and hear me in this conversation and say, well, the reason I'm stuck, the reason I'm still here is because I love them. I will not disagree that you love them. But here's what I share with a lot of women and young ladies for the most part. It's never about you being stuck in your relationship because you love them. The question is, do they love you? I'm here to tell somebody today it's time to become a better negotiator. Some of you are in relationships where you have negotiated for what you do not want. You have negotiated your standards and made them preferences. And here is the question for somebody on today that I want you to think about, a few of them. I want you to ask yourself this question when you look in the mirror. What do you deserve? While you're grieving in this relationship that you feel stuck in, what do you deserve? And more importantly, do you know your value? Many of the people we meet in our lives are always looking to pay less than the actual price for something. It can be a car, it can be a home, it can be anything. People are always looking to get a bargain. And for somebody that is grieving in your relationship right now, you no longer will allow somebody to get the discounted value of what you really cost. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I want you to remember this. You do not have to stay in a relationship looking for the return on your investment, because sometimes it's a bad deal, but more importantly, there is a greater cost of inaction. Well, thank you, somebody, for tuning in for this episode on the Brief on Grief. And I knew it was a little different, but like I said, we don't always grieve people at funerals. We grieve some people that are still walking around. And on our next episode on the Brief on Grief, we will follow up, because somebody is saying, I know I should leave, and I have a few points for you and a few ways for you to know, should you stay in your current relationship that you're grieving, or should you make the decision to leave? As always, we always know somebody that is grieving, and that somebody might be you. Thank you for tuning in to the Brief on Grief. And until next time,